without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So this is our order for tonight. We have 7 different departments represented, and we'll go ahead in this order unless anyone has any objections. So, kind of the way this goes, for those of you who haven't been to a 60-second lecture series before, is all the presenters will get 60 seconds, or as long as you need, we won't cut you off, to come up here and make your case and kind of introduce your topic to everyone in the order. And the goal is to get as close to 60 seconds as possible without going over. Again, if you go over, you're not penalized. It's just kind of a contest for honor. So if there's no questions, we'll go ahead and get started with Dr. Waters from physics.
So I'm Dr. Kyle Waters from the physics department, and if I was to give a title to this little talk, I'd call it We Are Stardust. So, ready, set, go. Physicists have spent a lot of time trying to determine the conditions and the reactions in the early universe. We know that things were very, very hot, and that they were very, very dense, and that in the very first half hour after the Big Bang, the universe built almost all of the matter that exists today. But did you know that most of the matter that exists in the universe today is in the form of just the very first 2 elements on the periodic table, hydrogen and helium? Together, hydrogen and helium compose 98% of all the matter in the universe. The good stuff that you and I are made of, carbon and nitrogen and oxygen, or that the Earth is made of, iron and silicon and magnesium, all combine to make up a measly 2% of the total. Now, the reason for this lopsidedness is that those 2 light elements, hydrogen and helium, are essentially the only elements the universe was able to create in that first half hour. So where did the other elements come from if they weren't made when the universe first formed? Well, the answer is truly spectacular. They were made by the stars. All stars, like our own sun, shine because they're powered by nuclear fusion, the release of energy resulting from 2 smaller atoms combining into a larger, heavier atom. Stars use fusion to combine hydrogen and helium into heavier atoms like carbon and nitrogen and oxygen. As a star ages, it will eventually run the course of its stellar lifetime and will erupt in a fantastic explosion that we call a supernova, blasting those heavier elements out into the universe. Well, they will eventually form new stars and planets and lecture halls and physics professors.
Next up, we have Dr. Eckerson from exercise science.
I'm going to discuss myths associated with diet and exercise, and they're all myths. Eating after 8 p.m. causes weight gain. It doesn't matter when you eat. It matters how much you eat and how much physical activity you do. No matter when you eat, if you eat too much, you're going to gain fat weight. All carbohydrates are bad and should be avoided. Carbohydrates are the preferred fuel source in the body, and while simple carbohydrates like sugar does not have very much nutrition, we need it post-exercise and during prolonged endurance exercise. Complex carbohydrates like grains, fruits, and vegetables should be the focus. Skipping meals helps you lose weight. Research shows that people who skip meals, particularly breakfast, tend to be heavier than individuals who eat 3 to 5 meals a day. Part of the reason is because glucose elevation during the day helps control your appetite, and then you won't eat as much if you've been starving yourself. And then finally, exercise does not turn fat into muscle. They're 2 totally different tissues. You might lose some fat weight and gain muscle, and it appears as though the 2 tissues are changing, but they're 2 totally separate tissues. Thank you.
Next up, we have Dr. Michels from chemistry.
It was October 31st, 1977. I was on Frank Phillips Boulevard, in front of the Frank Phillips building, starting my first real job with Phillips Petroleum Company. And all of a sudden I realized I'm working in the geology branch. Where the heck does oil come from? Fact or fiction, does it come from dinosaurs? I never knew. We didn't have a geology course at Creighton at that time. Fact. You'll never amount to anything, and 65 million years later, it's a fossil fuel. Fiction. God wouldn't have created creatures that only sell for, well, it's $1.97, it's about $3.10 now. But it is fiction. Oil comes from those little critters. And if you want to know the rest of the story and understand how oil is formed, you'll have to join me at the chemistry table.
Burk from Biology.
Well, people are fascinated by animal behavior, which is my field, and it's created a lot of myths and legends. Lemmings do not commit suicide by throwing themselves off the cliffs. However, when leaving an area of excess population, they probably do swim across a fjord to get to the other side. Animals don't predict earthquakes. However, animals do have, at least some animals, the ability to detect the very low frequency vibrations that begin at the start of an earthquake, which we can't detect. There are some other things which are completely false. You will never have to worry about being attacked by a vampire in Transylvania. You will never have to worry about an earwig moving into your ear and taking up residence. And you will never have to worry about a devil's darning needle, dragonfly, sewing together your lips or your eyelids while you sleep. On the other hand, be careful going home tonight, it's a full moon.
Next up we have Father Bucko from Anthropology.
And if I go up there, you won't see me. So let me go from here. First of all, don't start timing. First of all, I have a speech impediment and a note from the Office of Disability, so you may not time me at all. I get extra time. I have a note from President Obama, co-signed by Father Schlegel. It's all about connections. When I did my field work with the Lakotas, I met a very interesting Lakota man who was Greek Orthodox. He showed me an icon of Peter the Aleut, who was an indigenous man who was martyred. Years later, there was a conference here on religion and violence, and everybody was going for the big mass bombings. And I wanted to pick one instance of violence. Also, I had a vested interest. There are hymns in Russian that say the Jesuits murdered this man. And by fact, in 1815, when this man purportedly was murdered, the Jesuits had been expelled from the Catholic Church and there were no Jesuits. So I began research and came across a paper by Glenn Farris, and he had done all of the work. His paper was called Peter the Aleut, A Cautionary Tale. And he claimed there was no Peter the Aleut. You could make no historical claim for his existence. However, his story was meant to keep the indigenous people from the Russian colonies from defecting to the Spanish. I then contacted him, asked permission to use this paper, and I wove it into what do you do with a single act of violence. First of all, Peter the Aleut was neither named Peter, that was his baptismal name, nor was he an Aleut. He was from the Kodiak Island, which is not part of the Aleut chain. As I did my research, I began asking many people for advice, some of whom are in this very room, and I wrote this paper, delivered it, and it has taken on a life of its own. Years before I met Peter the Aleut, I studied under Ray Fogelson, an anthropology professor, and he wrote a paper called The Ethnohistory of Non-Events. And he talked about how things that you could not prove historically become important events in cultures and history. I had a non-event, or at least a questionable event. Within the week, there is a large debate on an Orthodox site over whether or not there was a real Peter the Aleut. There's no doubt there could have been someone named that. Did what happened to him happen to him? That becomes questionable. But we've gone on the website, because I joined it to keep up with the conversation, from this person cannot be proved to exist historically to how can you claim the Orthodox Church can be wrong? It's about connections. I wrote about what do you do with a single person who becomes a saint and a martyr, and if you look here, this is my first communion picture. No, actually, that's Peter the Aleut. And I was kind of hoping that DeWitt would have trouble with the picture, and that would be my whole minute while they tried to get it running. And so Peter the Aleut definitely was a person. Did what happened happen to him? It's about connections. Thank you.
Next up, we have Dr. Moreno from Social Science.
I'll come up here because if I sit there, you definitely won't see me. All right. Ready? Set. Go. I'm here to warn
warn you about an impending conflict. An impending conflict, we see lots of them every day. But there's one that some of you may be familiar with, the impending conflict between the humans and the Romulans. Those of you who may be fans of Star Trek may be fully aware of this inevitable trajectory towards conflict. Fiction, science fiction, fact. Political science literature talks a great deal about conflict. And in fact, authors like Kenneth Waltz tell us a great deal about conflict. 3 images exist in international relations, 3 images of conflict. One that roots conflict in human nature, species nature. Human, maybe Romulan. Second, roots conflict in the nature of the state. Good states, bad states. Dictatorships versus democracies. And third, roots conflict in the international system. In this case, the conflict between Romulans and humans may be interplanetary systems. So I ask you, which of those 3 explanations for conflict is more compelling?
And finally, we have Dr. Roddy from Theology.
All right. We can figure out the technology and then we'll go here.
It's on.
All right, go. The profound religious influence of Western civilization of the Hebrew Bible, some classes say walks on 2 legs, the Greek and the Hebrew. What I'm going to look at tonight is that even the Hebrew part of it has been thoroughly Hellenized. And you know what? I'm not going to use this because it's not working for me.
On the side. On the side.
It's on the side.
Nope. Yeah. Push down. There you
Okay. This fact has had serious implications for the picture of Eve, and I would say because of the profound influence on Western culture for all of her daughters since that time as well. Traditionally, the story's been interpreted in terms of a fall, the Garden of Eden story I'm talking about, instigated by the devil who disguised as a snake deceives Eve into eating a forbidden apple. The consequences of which, as you know, they're expelled from Eden, and that the woman experiences pain in childbirth. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go right to, because I want to keep to the minute as close as possible, I'm going to go right to the translation. If Eve was such a terrible woman, why after Genesis 3 does she not get mentioned again? However, she does appear in Hellenistic times. We have in the Deuterocanonical text that the death of the human race is attributed to her. And even in the canonical New Testament, for Adam was formed first, then Eve. Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. What I would like us to be able to do is to have technology. This doesn't work. I'm going to suggest that our traditional understanding has been affected by 2 hallmarks of Hellenistic culture. Number 1, it's misogyny. For example, Aristotle, on his Generation of Animals, set about to demonstrate why women were inferior to men. He already accepted it as a fact that they were, and wanted to find out why. Another influence is akin to Orphic thought, which viewed the material world largely as the product of a fall. And yet, when we look at the text itself, we see several words that aren't there. We don't see the word fall in the Genesis story. We don't see the word sin until Genesis chapter 4. We see it traditionally, we've inherited a first created male. Woman is merely a helper. Woman is a tempter of man responsible for sin. And women cursed by pain in childbirth. Let's look at the translations of the Hebrew Bible, the early ones. We've got one 9 months, and the other, well, conception's a lot more fun. In grief you will bear children. You will be in grief you will bear children. Yet it suited him to go with the Greek, the power of your husband, and he will rule over you. However, when we go to the Hebrew Bible, we've got some words that I won't take the time to go because I've already lost so much of my time because of my inability to work this particular translation. And then I've got some slides that talk about how if we were to get back to the original text as it would have been understood, in a labor-intensive agricultural society, we would find that women had to work alongside with men, doing double duty, in addition to bearing children, which was a very dangerous kind of thing to do. You can read that over my shoulder as I'm going. This is an actual archaeological report from one of my archaeology professors, Dig, at Tel Gezer, that talks about how men and women are found together in the burial sites, suffering from severe osteoarthritis, and dying at about the average age of 35. So, what I would like to suggest is that with that understanding of a labor-intensive agricultural society, removing the influence of Hellenistic Roman culture on the Hebrew Bible, the understanding of the Hebrew text of Genesis 3:16 would go something like this. I will greatly multiply your toils and the number of times you get pregnant. Along with the demands of your labor in the fields, you shall continue to produce children. For despite the double duty and mortal risk, your desire, because the word is teshukah, it's not submission. It served Jerome well to keep submission. But the actual word there, as some modern translations have, is teshukah, which is amorous desire, is toward your husband. And although you may hold back from being out in the field and acting on that amorous desire, knowing that you will possibly die and have to live such a difficult life, he'll give you that look. You know that look? Some of you? And you'll fulfill the first commandment, which is to go forth and multiply. Okay, that was like 7 minutes.
Back there.